Hello, and welcome once again to On the Go with the Glen Advantage team. I'm Marcia Glenn, your host for today, and I have the pleasure of being here at the office of the Greater Rochester, Association of Realtors with Jim Yockel, who is the CEO of the GRAR. So, Jim, tell us a little bit about yourself and your job as CEO.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm the chief executive officer of the association. I've been here 27 years, 27 in March 1st.
Wow. I didn't realize.
Yeah, it's been a long time. I started in the finance office. Actually, I was the controller and worked with the member services staff and the accounts payable people. And then very shortly, we had a need to take over the multiple listing service department. And so John Piper, who was the CEO at the time, asked me if I'd manage that team. And I did. And then very quickly, they started leaving for one reason or another. And I was the last one left. So I became the MLS department. I did that for 12 years. And then I've been CEO for the last 13.
Wow. Okay. So full disclosure, I obviously have been a member of the board as a associate broker with GRAR for 30 plus years. So I did not realize that our time had flown by so quickly between 27 and 30 plus years. But you mentioned John Piper, and I'm like, oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Right. He hired me in 1998.
Okay. So give us some background in terms of GRAR, having been around for 100 years, giving real estate professionals the tools that we need in order to serve the communities in the Rochester and Finger Lakes and beyond. And tell us more about the organization itself.
The fundamental reason GRAR is here is we're here to support brokers and agents as they support consumers and whatever needs there are. And as times change, that has changed. Our role has changed. A continuing high priority is professional development. Mm-hmm. So we have our own real estate school that we create all of the content for. We consult with a couple of teachers, but we now typically create all of our own content so that the agents have the ability to get all of their license requirements through us as part of their dues for free. And we then provide technology support. We run the multiple listing service, which is the primary tool for agents. All of the products that go along with it, like electronic forms, public records, documents, showing, scheduling, tools, everything that you need, we are there kind of in tandem with the broker. There are certain things that make sense to be system-wide. So one showing service makes it easier for everybody, easier for consumers. So the multiple listing service runs that. Things that are differentiators between brokerages, we leave to the broker. So we have basic forms, but brokerages create their own forms. And we just sort of fill the gaps that are needed to make the market efficient and make it easy for the buyers and sellers.
Okay. So agents obviously know that are associated with the board how extensive the board is and all of the things that the board touches upon. But just how far, the public doesn't necessarily know, just how far does the Greater Rochester Association of Realtors actually extend to?
There's two pieces. The association goes basically from Auburn to Batavia and then straight south to the Pennsylvania border. We're part of an alliance with Buffalo, Syracuse, and several other associations for the MLS database. So our database actually goes to Watertown, Utica, Rome, Cooperstown, and everything west.
See, I know that the public is not necessarily aware in terms of how far-reaching we really are.
Exactly, yep. And so we've done a lot of work to kind of break down any artificial barriers based on geography. So you as an agent can go anywhere and get the exact same information as anybody who's in Cooperstown.
Sweet, yeah. Sweet. Very helpful to the public, for sure. So tell us about what the organization itself does for its members and then how that translates out to what it does for the public.
Yeah, the biggest thing I think that extends through to the public is we're kind of like the 911 center for agents. Anything goes wrong, you call your broker. If the broker isn't there or you can't reach them, you can call us, and our staff is here. And we have learned over the years to answer almost any question or direct you to the person who can answer the question. So we know where our limits are. We try to not answer things that we're not qualified for. But we're really that first the first call you make when something's going wrong. So it could be as simple as you're at a showing and your super key is not working to open the lockbox. Call us and then we'll handle it. That doesn't always help if it's off hours, but we then provide you with 24-hour access to the help desk for the super center. So we provide the resources that wherever you are, whatever you're doing, we give you as much information to solve your own problems as you can. But we're here to do what else we can.
Okay, so for example, you just brought up super key. So agents, we know what that is and what that means.
Yeah.
Public does not necessarily know what super key.
Good point.
What is that?
Super it's an electronic lockbox system. So when you are listing your home for sale, the agent will use one of these highly secure boxes, attach it to the house, attach it to the fence, and only an agent with an approved key with a current account can access that box to get the key. So it gives you comfort in showings. If there's ever a problem, somebody leaves the door open and it rains and there's damage to the floor, we know who the last person in that home was through their key. So that it's highly secure. It's very personal to the showing agent, and it gives the homeowner a sense of comfort that any random person can't just walk into their house, or someone says, the key's under the rock, everybody go in.
Right.
We know exactly who's going in and exactly how long they're there and when they leave the area.
Right. It does give a great list in terms of all the individual showings that have taken place.
Yes.
For example, if you have an agent that's not on site for showings, they can definitely track and make sure that those people who have indeed scheduled to see the house have indeed gone through the house.
Yep.
And they can get, some defined feedback for sure for their client that they're representing. It also gives the client an advantage that they hand off a key and they don't have to worry that the key is going to be lost somewhere. It is indeed in the box that's at the house always, and only those people registered with the board are able to access it.
Yes.
And I have to say, because I've been with the board for so long, probably, when the lock boxes first came out, the super lock boxes, I really was one of those people like, okay, is it really that secure? Are people not going to be able to actually access this? That I bought a box and I actually tried to run over it.
Yeah.
To see whether or not it would open.
Yep.
Absolutely would not. Absolutely would not. So I can definitely attest to the fact that they are indeed secure.
And I can tell you, I've had people where they've malfunctioned. It's rare, but they do. You have to cut them off of the door with giant bolt cutters, but then it takes like a drill press to get into them.
Right.
So we used to have this really heavy duty drill, and it would take me a half hour to drill through to get the key if the homeowner really wanted their key back.
So nobody's going to be grabbing that key that isn't able to actually be a part of the board and is supposed to be accessing it without a approved appointment. So, ROC Housing.
Yes.
Tell me.
We started this effort in conjunction with the home builders and the mortgage bankers called Re-Imagine ROC Housing. And it actually came as a result of the economic forecast breakfast we do every year. A couple of years ago, I was presenting just the kind of the state of the market and putting my information together. And it hit me that there's this persistent decline in homes available for sale that went back 20 years. And as you look back, you can see where, there's the recession, and then there was this, and then there was recovery. And there's always a reason to justify why there aren't enough listings. But when you look back over 20 years, it is a really consistent downward trend. And it started to worry me. So one of the things everybody asks is, what keeps you up at night? So in my presentation, they said, this is actually starting to keep me up at night. We have, for 20 years, seen a decline in homes for sale. There's something has to be driving this. So I did a bunch of research, and there are many factors that go into it. A huge part is underbuilding that began before the recession, but really was exacerbated. And we've never recovered to the point that in Monroe County, we're somewhere close to 18,000 building permits short of what would have been typical in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s. So there's chronic underbuilding. And again, lots of reasons for that. Land costs are up, labor costs are up, regulation is up, interest rates are up, everything is up. But that doesn't explain the whole thing. So
does supply come into that as well?
The supply is just dwindling. So sales have been pretty consistent. New inventory comes on, it goes off, but the overall supply has been really consistent downward spike or a downward line. So one of the things that I think is contributing that we're not paying attention to is there is a strong trend of corporate ownership of single family homes for rental. And there's some really big companies, BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, hedge funds with trillions of dollars. BlackRock is a $2 trillion company, and they are buying up every single family home they can get, and they're renting them. And those are things that probably not ever come back until they're in the state where they don't want them anymore because they can't rent them.
Right.
So we're trying to figure out how much of that is our market. But if you read industry publications, will say 20 to 25% of single family home sales in any given year across the country are to corporate investors.
Wow.
And that is not to say that corporate investors or landlords are evil by any stretch.
Right.
But when hundreds of thousands of homes are going year after year into this, it worries me a little bit because it limits the opportunity for the average person to become a homeowner, which we all know is such a great thing to have stability in housing, building wealth. And so that is being
The
locked
dream.
up a little
The
bit.
American
The American dream is harder and harder. And then recently you see interest rates and inflation, and the gap for what an average person can afford and the median price of a home gets bigger. Rents go up, they can save less. We're potentially in the beginning of a downward spiral where home ownership becomes unattainable for a large number of middle income people.
Right. So what are we going to do to end up
So that's the
counteracting
whole point.
that?
Yeah, so Re-Imagine ROC Housing was designed to raise awareness and go to towns, county officials, elected officials, and say, you need to understand what's happening. Everybody kind of knows anecdotally what's going on in their town, but without numbers to back it up, it's too easy to kind of kid yourself. So we've been talking to nonprofits, community partners, elected officials, business people. Hospitals are having a really hard time keeping nurses because they can't afford to live in a reasonable commute. And so they drive 45 minutes, and as soon as they can get a job at a hospital in North Carolina, they're gone. And that's been a problem for a long time. So we are making some progress. We're breaking through, and we have a lot of people in elected office now saying, okay, we get it. If you ask almost anybody, do you know someone with an adult child living in their home? They will say yes. And usually the reason is they can't find a place. Whether it's an apartment or a home, they just can't find a place, or they can't find one they're afford, or if they can afford it, they're outbid by the 22 offers from 6 of them are probably from a hedge fund. So we are at the point now where towns in particular are recognizing this and are starting to say, okay, what do we do? And so the Re-Imagine ROC Housing is introducing innovative ideas to create new supply of housing. None of them are actually new. They're things that work in other parts of the country, but maybe just haven't made it here. So accessory dwelling units were a big talking point. A few years ago, the governor was talking about them. And if you don't change your zoning, we're going to force you to accept them. So they've got a little bit of a bad rap, but it's a great solution for an independent senior who wants to have their own place near their family, doesn't want a lot of square footage. An accessory dwelling unit might be a great option,
Right.
but they're not easily attained. Towns tend to look down on them. You can buy one at Walmart for $45,000 and have it delivered. But towns don't allow them. So things like that, tiny homes,
The
investigating.
tiny homes is
Yeah, factory built
quite
homes
the idea.
are way better than what most people think. You can go into some modular homes and have no idea. And the price points are reasonable. And so my fear is that the people solving this housing shortage are non-traditional builders. I have a call later today with a 3D printer who uses recycled water bottles as the input. They design and build this in a factory in a couple of days. They finish it, they bring it to the site, and within 90 to 120 days, you can have they're not big, 800, 900 square foot home, but for under 300,000, it's 3D printed. So there's no realtor, there's no banker, there's no builder. So our traditional industry players aren't involved, but that's the kind of thing that will help solve this crisis. If we try and solve the workforce housing with traditional building, a builder can't build a home for under $450 these days. And that's not the market that needs it. We need 150 to 300.
We do need 150 to 300 for sure.
Yeah.
That I can definitely agree with. So there's been a lot of factors that have come into play with that as well. Being that I've been in the business for a little bit better than 30 years, I started off when interest rates were 13%.
Yeah.
When they came down to 9%, everyone in the business was doing a little dance like, this is fabulous. I can't believe they're down to 9%. This is unbelievable. And then 5 years ago, when, we were getting close to COVID and all the nonsense that was going on with that, when they dropped down just to keep things moving along to under 3, people got a little too used to it.
I think so.
Like, it was never going to be a sustainable factor in any marketplace.
Right.
Banks were not going to be able to continue to lend it. All they were trying to do is push things and keep things moving forward.
Right.
Now we're averaging, somewhere 6 to 7 in that range on average, which I still think is a fabulous rate.
Yeah.
But are you finding overall with the board that people they're adapting to the fact that this is really good?
Yeah.
If you want to take a moment to actually think about it, because you can't tell your clients continually, oh, it's too bad we can't get you 3%. Because what you should be saying, I think, is we never could afford to continue to get you 3%.
Yeah, there's no way that was going to continue forever. And I think you're right. People tend to have short memories, and every month that goes by, the 3% rate kind of falls a little farther back. But I think, and you know better than me, but life decisions and life circumstance determine your moves more often than not. So if you're moving for a job, you need to buy a house, you need to buy a house.
Right.
And you're not going to not take a better job because of 6% interest rates, probably. So those life factors are continuing to happen. But I think the bigger problem is specifically for active seniors. I read a study, it said 28 million homes are occupied by somebody who uses less than half the square footage.
Oh.
And it's different, same concept. About a third of homes, 3 bedrooms and up, are occupied by empty nesters. So they kind of go together. But these are people who've lived in a home 20, 30, 40 years, raised a family, maybe ready to downsize, but there's nowhere to go.
Mm-hmm.
And so they can't leave. Even if you gave them a 2%, they don't have a place to buy. It doesn't matter. And so big part of the Re-Imagine ROC Housing is we need to find better solutions for our independent active seniors. As healthcare improves, lifespans are lengthening a little bit, we need to find a solution or they'll never leave their family home, which has stopped the normal cycle of home ownership.
Pushing each level up.
Everybody's competing for the same small pool of those middle market homes because the people in them who many would like to downsize, lower maintenance, less square footage, less cost, they can't. And until we solve that problem, I don't know that we'll ever be able to solve that workforce housing piece because you can't build a home that you can sell for $250.
Right. Won't be able to catch up.
Yeah.
So tell me about the REALTORS Charitable Foundation. All the other things that the board is involved with and realtors are involved with that, again, public does not necessarily know.
Yeah, we have a foundation that was started I think right around 2000, 2001, and it was designed to kind of assist nonprofits working in the housing sector in many different ways. We've granted money to, I think it's over 40 different organizations, approaching $1 million of realtor donations. The last few years, it's been kind of on pause. COVID really killed the ability to raise any money because you couldn't do any events. And we sort of felt like it needed a reboot anyway. And so we just said, let's not focus on that while we're trying to just keep the industry running. But now the Re-Imagine ROC Housing is going to be a vehicle to reignite that foundation and to start collecting money for very specific needs and partnering with other nonprofits. I think we're going to focus more on first-time home buyers, generationally first-time home buyers, getting people on the wealth building cycle, ESL Foundation's got a really great program that they've started to close the homeownership gap between Black and white Americans. Rochester has, if it's not the worst, it's one of the worst disparities in the country. And there are many, many people who could be successful homeowners who are being blocked for lack of inventory, just lack of access, and our market dynamics are not helping. So we're partnering with that and raising money to kind of fund the things that help unstick the market.
Okay.
And that could be studies into how to do better with senior housing. It could be more assistance for first-time home buyers who are really close but just need a little help. We can partner with the nonprofits to do that. So it's really exciting. We have an interesting path forward.
Great. I know a number of years ago, I was on the board for that piece of it, and it really was enlightening,
It is.
rewarding, everything that comes along with working along that particular line and that particular venue.
You'll hear more about that next year.
Fabulous. So the Monroe County Vacant and Abandoned Property Task Force.
I was a part of that.
Tell me what that is.
When Adam Bello was county clerk, he was very concerned about zombie properties and the impact they were having. He was a big proponent of solving that problem when he was the Rondequoit town supervisor. And so he asked if I would be part of this work group, and met many times for a couple of years. And I have to say it was an eye opener. This is a massive problem that is almost impossible to solve. And the between the banking regulations and the things that the banks are required to do, and insurance, and how the whole thing legally works, we did as much work as we could to streamline it. New York state law requires notice periods and the intent is good, is to give somebody who may be entitled to that property as much time to respond as possible, so they don't, you miss a notice by 30 days and you're out of luck. But it could be a 3-year process to kind of move it through to where somebody can take ownership and rehab it. So they did a lot of work to streamline the court process, doing things concurrently where you could to kind of shorten it. I think they got it down to more like 18 to 24 months. Again, COVID kind of put that on pause. We had a lot of work to do for those couple of years. And so now the work is still happening. It's internal in the county office. We have regular communication with the county executive in his office. And I know that he's a strong supporter of this work to improve the housing availability and choice. But I think we've done as much as we can with streamlining the vacant property.
Okay. And the advocacy group. Tell me that.
One of the greatest things we do as the association is we kind of represent the 3,000 realtors in those 13 counties, and we establish relationships with all the elected officials. I go regularly to meet them and just talk about housing. We don't try to put our hand on the scale too much. It's more about sharing information and being a resource so that better decisions are made. Occasionally, we'll weigh in on something that just doesn't make sense. Right now, there's a law proposed to require sprinkler systems in every new construction. And that'll raise the price of new construction another $12,000 to $15,000. And there's been a requirement that the builder offer a sprinkler system for several years. I talked to the home builders, and they have had zero in the kind of normal market. There have been a couple in, multi-million-dollar mansions that have done it, but there just isn't interest. And nobody wants anybody to die in a fire, but a sprinkler system isn't necessarily going to prevent that. It limits damage to the home. It doesn't stop the fire from starting. It doesn't always save the people that may be in there. So I think there's the approach is not, this is wrong, don't do it. It's, have you thought about some of the consequences? We're going to make homeownership more out of reach for a lot of people, and we may not really be solving the problem. So let's talk about what the real problem is. And that approach seems to work. We've been fighting good cause eviction in the city of Rochester for a long time. Similar concept. Everybody knows that there are some really bad landlords, and there is some substandard housing out there. But the good cause eviction law essentially lets someone stay in the substandard housing for as long as they want without onerous rent increases, but the housing is still substandard. And so that's the problem. And so we've been engaging with a lot of elected officials saying, we understand the problem. We are willing to work with you to solve this because we don't agree with it. But the law as written is likely to drive the better small housing providers out of the market and put more people into these corporate owned by some conglomerate in Atlanta that has never even seen the property. And that's not better.
It's not better.
It's different, but it's not better. So let's make housing better. So sometimes we're successful, sometimes we're not, but we're the voice consistently there saying, have you thought about this? Let's turn the conversation back to what provides the best housing options for the people who live in our community.
And exactly. And ends up being able to have the community work together, know what's happening, and know that there are actually people who are indeed advocating for,
Right.
which is really important. And I don't think that sometimes I think the public is just not aware of how much goes on behind the scenes in order to try to make life better for those who are living in our community.
And I think that's an important piece. Behind the scenes, face-to-face, one-on-one is where you can have an impact. We don't call people out in the paper. We're not going to do a press conference to say this elected official is wrong. We're not going to make anybody look bad. We're going to say, here's why we disagree with you. Here's information you may not know. Let's talk about it. And, we're open to new information too. And like I said, sometimes you can have success, sometimes you can't, but we're there advocating for homeowners and for future homeowners.
Right. So tell me, how many agents are actually with the board?
Right around 3,000.
3,000. Okay. So this is kind of a good little segue into how this new NAR settlement is impacting our community. And how those 3,000 agents who are associated with the board can indeed end up dealing with that. Because this is not something that's new. I mean, it's been going on for the past, year and a half, 2 years prior to, August 15th or 18th it was this year. Okay, this is what's happening and things are changing. But it wasn't something that was like brand new. But the public, it was new for the vast majority of them because they really were not keeping up on it. So
And it was hard to keep them up because things changed.
It was going
weekly sometimes. And it was hard to know what to tell the public to expect. But we worked as hard as we could to get information in the hands of the brokers and the agents to prepare them for this. So for those who weren't aware, there was a court case where sellers were accusing the industry of colluding to keep commissions high by requiring a seller to offer compensation to the buyer's agent before the home was listed in the sale or listed in the MLS. And NAR had a rule that said you can't put it in the MLS unless there is an offer of compensation. So I think if you step back from our industry and you look at it, I think you can see where that maybe creates some problems. The three people in the transaction, there are three of the four parties who actually do better when the price goes up. The person who does not is the buyer, and they're the one writing the check. So you can see where someone would say, wait a minute, why is the seller and the listing agent determining what the buyer agent compensation is, and then they're working together? It seems a little odd. So the final outcome of the court case was you can't offer compensation to the buyer's agent in the MLS. It could be part of the offer and part of the negotiation, but they wanted to give the buyer the chance to negotiate their compensation directly with their buyer's agents. So there's the two requirements were it can't be in the MLS anymore, and every buyer will need to sign a buyer representation agreement with their buyer's agent that says specifically, this is how I get paid, this is what I get paid, and this is how it's going to work. And I think I like to look forward and try and see the half full glass. I think if you're a buyer's agent and you're comfortable having that conversation, I don't think anything really changes. It's different, but now you're in charge. One, you're in charge of your own compensation. And if you want to charge more, you charge more. If you want to charge less, you can charge less. You're not required to accept what the seller has decided you're worth. So I think that's a different way to look at it. And it's not a lot different than what agents have always done on the listing side. meet with the sellers. This is what I do. This is what I charge. Here's how it's all going to work. And you sign an agreement. So I was pleasantly surprised at how relatively smooth it went when the day hit. There still was some consumer confusion, but I think the agents are great at figuring things out. One of the best attributes you have is when something goes wrong, you're right there figuring out solutions. And this was just another thing. And so most people, I think, figured that out pretty quickly. I don't think that's done. I think the Department of Justice is very much interested in our industry. We are the largest self-regulated industry in the world, and housing is a huge part of our economy. It's 18% of GDP. And I think the government looks at it and says, we don't like that you're self-regulated still, or self-policing. So they're not going away. And they have said, the Department of Justice has said clearly in court statements, we think commissions should be completely decoupled. There should be no sharing at all. Buyer agents take care by the buyer, listing agents take care by the seller, and that's it. And I think if we look at that as the worst case outcome, I don't think it's awful. It gives you a chance to represent your client. There is no potential perceived conflict of interest, and it's clean and it's sufficient.
Well, I think in the introduction for this, or bringing it into the actual workings of our marketplace, many agents kind of thought, well, I don't understand why we even are having this conversation.
Yeah.
Which was always the case in terms of any contract that you ever had with any of your clients, customers/clients, was that the compensation was always negotiable.
Right.
So there was never anything written into any kind of a law somewhere that said that X had to be the amount for the compensation. I think that people just became a little bit complacent with that piece of it, and just had an expectation that that was what was always going to be accepted. So that conversation always needed to take place.
Yes.
When you were sitting down with someone signing a contract, whether it be a listing contract or whether it be that buyer agency agreement, that conversation always had to take place that, okay, let's talk about what is the comfort for being compensated for either buyer and or the actual listing agent. So I think that that's the piece that people were somewhat uncomfortable with because they had not indeed been introducing it into the conversation.
You're right.
All along.
And I think once people got around this is different and I don't like it and focused on it, it was easy to have that conversation for most people because you're doing it on the listing side. And for consumers, there's been a lot of studies done, and most consumers value their agent. Like 80-90% of them said, my agent was very valuable. I wouldn't want to do this without them. They understand you're professionals. They understand you provide a valuable service. They are willing to pay you. They never kind of knew how, but they didn't care because it just happened. And so it's just a different world for everybody. And we need to explain to consumers. Agents need to explain their value a little bit differently. But it seems to be settling out into an okay spot.
I believe so as well. And I think that it always was a case of making sure that whatever side you were working with was completely familiar with how that side worked.
Exactly.
And that's not something that's a bad thing.
No.
That is something that's definitely keeping the person that you're representing engaged in the reasons why you do the things that you do. So a buyer agency agreement was not or should not be considered to be something that is unable to be introduced, or you have to have your hair on fire before you end up introducing it, because it's a very much a plus. You sit down and you have a conversation with that person that you're turning from customer into clients.
Yes.
And you fully lay out all of those things that are beneficial to them in terms of why you need us to become part of this whole experience.
The majority of issues that end up coming to our association are all poor communication. And so this forces that communication earlier, and I think it will end up solving a lot of problems before they ever happen because that communication is now upfront. It's required.
Right. And both buyers and sellers really want they want to be informed.
Yes.
And this mandates that they now become informed in a lot more that they're going to be involved in terms of buying or selling.
Yeah.
So I think I think it's a plus myself.
I do too.
Yeah.
I think we'll adjust and everyone will be fine.
Yes. Yes. They'll be heavy. The heavy breathing can go away. So supply and demand in terms of buying and selling or trying to buy a home, and the prices being high and still competition and fierce for the past few years that we've all experienced in this marketplace. What do you see for 2025? What's your crystal ball, Jim, for 2025?
I wish I had better news, but I don't see a lot changing. We talked about some of it. I think if you look back to last year, when inflation started to come down, everybody's like, "Oh, the Fed's going to cut interest rates 8 times, and then it's going to." We tend to overreact to everything, good and bad. But I think if you look at where we are, inflation is still close to 3%, 2.7, and the Fed keeps saying we think it should be 2. So there's a lot of way to go, and that last bit is the hardest bit. It's harder to get from 2.7 to 2 than it is from 5 to 2.7.
Right.
So as I look at it, I don't know how you could just keep cutting interest rates 6, 7, 8 times without reigniting inflation. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't see it. And you're starting to see some economic people saying, maybe 2 or 3, but I think 6% interest rates, mortgage rates are here for a while. So as we talked about before, it's not awful. It's different than what we've been used to, but it's manageable, and most people will become comfortable with that. The real problem is supply of owner-occupied housing to meet the demand that we know we have. There are hundreds and hundreds of qualified buyers, pre-approved, ready to buy, but still it may not be 40 offers on a home, but it's still, 8, 9, 10 a lot of times. So that demand is there. The supply is not until we ease on the supply side. I just don't see what changes. There could be lots of weird economic stuff. I think most people agree our economy is pretty strong, given everything that we've gone through. But in our market, until we have 1,000 new homes come to the market, I don't know how anything changes.
Right. So I'm trying to get some of the sellers that I'm representing used to, they're not going to have the equity in their house go down.
Right.
It's going to remain up.
Yep.
They may not have 20 offers. They may have 5, depending upon what price point they're in, but they're still getting more than what they would have gotten before 5 years ago.
Right.
So the buyers are still out there, and they are still wanting more supply.
Yep.
And some of them are kind of backing off a little bit.
Yeah.
Because of not being able to get over that.
And I think
that's not changing.
Yeah, and you hear people. There were during the election, there was a proposal from Vice President Harris to apply or to provide a $25,000 first-time homebuyer grant, which sounds great, and it's good to help people. But if they are competing with 10 or 12 other offers, that maybe isn't the thing that gets them over the hump. So we have to look at what's causing the problem. First-time home buyers, many of them, it's not about money.
Right.
They can afford it. They maybe can't outbid, and having a little extra cushion isn't going to change that dynamic really in any major scale. But we've had people also say, well, we should give current owners, a capital gains tax break to incentivize them to sell their home. Sounds great, but if there's nowhere for them to go,
where are they going to go?
You could give them $1 million. Doesn't matter. So however you look at it, I just keep coming back to there's 2 people in the transaction, and they both need a place to live at the end of it. And if one can't find a place to live, the transaction's not going to happen. And I don't see anything happening here to add significant inventory. In fact, just a little to the east, north of Syracuse, this Micron plant is going in, and they're talking about, I forget how many, tens of thousands of jobs over the next bunch of years. But Syracuse is in the same kind of market dynamics we are. So they're managing all the same things, plus they're looking at these 30,000, 40,000 new people coming in to work at this Micron plant. They're totally focused on solving that problem, but that's going to take years and years. And so even as we kind of understand what we need to do, there's more pressure limiting supply right now than there is extending supply.
So that's what we have to figure
we've got to
out.
find
We got to
creative-
figure that one out.
The three independent senior housing condos, I think, are a huge opportunity for us. We just don't build a lot of condos, but the price is right. The maintenance free, the density solves a lot of problems. So we have to get towns maybe a little more willing to accept condos, and then we just have to look at little chunks here and there. It's gonna take a while.
Sounds easy. It's
Yep.
going to take a while. Sounds easy, but it's going to
Sounds
take a
easy.
while.
Yeah.
All right. So I'd like to thank you, Mr. Yockel, in terms of spending your time with us today and certainly enlightening the public, which is really what this was geared for today, in terms of what's happening with our market, where it's going, where it's been, and what we can do in terms of our crystal ball here going into the future. If you'd like to find out more about Greater Rochester Association of Realtors, please go to GRAR.org. Check out our show notes for more information on today's show. Jim, thank you very much for allowing us in and having this kind of in-depth conversation in terms of what has been happening and what's going to be happening. And please, this is On the Go with the Glenn Advantage team. I'm your host, Marcia Glenn. Remember to search in terms of our show notes, as well as look up where to go for our podcasts, and follow, like, and subscribe if you'd like to get involved in the series. And once again, please remember, Glenn Advantage team would love to be your advantage in the marketplace. Happy holidays, and thank you very much.